So hi, good evening, everybody. The fag end of the day and a difficult, time when to keep the audience engaged, but brings in a lot of expertise. So in the morning, we all heard the Honorable Minister really talk about his ambitious plans and how he was, viewing of Telangana really trailblazing in all the 5 revolutions that he talked about. But it is very important for us as when we trailblaze to also be very aware of the risks that are associated as we move ahead. So if you look at it, the meat and poultry sector is crucial for India's food security. We discussed that in the morning. And besides this, there are nearly 2/3 of the rural population who depends on livestock rearing. And there is also a huge potential in terms of export for this sector. But it is also very important for us to see what are the risks associated. And the last 2 years with the pandemic, we saw, that this presents a huge, risk to it. So this has also significantly impacted the industry. So today I would like to understand from our esteemed panels what would be the most effective risk mitigation strategies for us to follow to ensure that we are able to continue unabated and, like the Honorable Minister said in the morning, like to really trailblaze and move forward. So I would like to start with Mr. Vikas Dhul, and would like you to share your experience in terms when the pandemic hit. What is it that you faced at that point in time, and what are the current practices that you followed to be able to tide over the challenges that the pandemic threw at you?
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me and to this panel discussion. So this, when we talk about pandemic, it was a very unique experience for the industry and for us. So the biggest challenge that we had, not unlike other countries where people started consuming more protein, but nobody was ready to buy chicken or eat chicken. So what we learned, and another problem which was there was related to supply chain. We were not able to move raw materials. We were not able to. Suddenly there was prices increased. So what we learned from this was that we have to be more. We need to be more flexible in terms of raw material procurement. We need to have more robust supply chain, and we need to have better storage facilities so that we can store our produce and be able to sell in later time. So as a Skylark group, after the pandemic, we decided that we have to go into value addition, because shelf life of our product increases once we cook it, value add it, and store it. So that was primarily the thing that what we did after the pandemic. Apart from this pandemic, another pandemic which is going on in the industry is avian influenza that I really want to talk about. Avian influenza is endemic now. Every year we see a lot of cases which are happening. Right now we are facing bird flu issues in eastern India, where because of that some states have even closed borders, and there are a lot of issues. So to counter that, I think we really need to work on biosecurity, vaccines. We have a lot of issues. The vaccines are not been available. So I think we really need to work to develop all these vaccines to mitigate these risks going forward.
Okay, thank you. That brings me to Dr. Ganapathy. As a PSC fellow, we would like you to talk more in terms of the biotechnology and biosafety perspective. How can we use biotechnology and genetic engineering here to tide over these risks that Vikas was talking about? So what is it that you are currently focusing on, and what is your view on this?
There is a lot in there. First of all, apologies. I was delayed coming from the other session. There were two questions I heard. One is focused on biotechnology and other such technologies to tide over it, and then you also asked what are we doing about it. So I'll first answer the second one first. Currently, Government of India is putting together a national One Health mission approved by the Prime Minister Science and Technology Innovation Advisory Council that brings all these science funding agencies and human health side ministries and the departments, animal husbandry side departments, and Ministry of Environment and Forests and Climate Change, and also disaster management agencies and the defense side for the biosecurity side of things. So these are all the key stakeholders that are brought together to have a comprehensive pandemic preparedness of both human pandemics and animal pandemics, and have an integrated disease control. That's, in a nutshell what is happening. Now, to answer the first question, science and technology have a very important role to play here. One is in the preparedness. There was a mention on avian influenza. In animal side, we had, and for the pig industry, we had a really bad outbreaks of the African swine fever recently. And in the cattle side, lumpy skin disease that you all have known about. And all of these require us to be better prepared. There, it requires us to have better surveillance, and that surveillance is traditional surveillance, meaning somebody reporting that there is a disease happening and having the data linkages, etc. But also emerging technologies such as genomic technologies to have environmental surveillance, so that you could pick up a soil, pick up effluents, and identify nucleic acid that will give you much better resolution on which pathogen is spreading, and also tells you, gives you lead time earlier before the disease is full blown. So that's one example where you detect the disease better. And this is especially true for diseases like avian influenza, where you have migratory birds, and you have poultry, and you have human health side. By the time you detect a human case, it's already way too late. By the time you detect poultry outbreak, it's probably late. So that's where you need to put in these kind of technologies. So that's one place. And the second is in vaccines and other therapeutics and other preventive measures. So they're using the emerging technology. We should not wait for a technology to have made a difference in human side, and that comes to this sector. It's like mRNA or DNA vaccines or other emerging nanoparticle vaccines, or such technologies are useful in having better preparedness in terms of vaccine development and so on. And also going beyond biotechnology, whether it is digital technologies or whether data analytics, disease modeling, so that you can use the information to better predict how the disease might spread and have scenario planning. If this were to happen, what would be the implication? What is the risk boundary, and how should we be prepared? Because you cannot always imagine the worst case scenario and be prepared. That nobody will have the resources for it. You have to have an appropriate response based on the informed decision making that is built upon the data from the field, as well as analytics to go with it. So that's the, I would say, answer to the two questions.
Yeah, thank you. Talking about digital data and data modeling, Dr. Ganapathy, that you were talking about, I would now ask Mr. Alfred, who is from Polar Genetics, and which have presence in several countries, and you have been working very effectively on this data modeling and digital data integration and synthesis. So if you could throw a little light in terms of what is it that you have done, and how has that helped, and what has been your experience in the other countries that you have been working on.
Okay. Happy to be in the largest democracy in the world now, particularly that you've got a population bigger than China's. So congratulations, if that's in order. and some of the information that said you'll soon be at 1.8 billion people, which is maybe scary for India, as a matter of fact. I've traveled quite a bit in the world, and have seen and have influenced my thinking in what is happening or in how it can't be solved a little bit better by some better evaluations of pigs. The biggest one now is this African swine fever, and it's a big problem. Absolutely was a big problem in China, continues to be that because there's still some movement of the virus. The fact that it's not capable, or we haven't been able to find a vaccine for African swine fever, although you have one for classical swine fever. And so this is a big worry in India. It's a big worry around the world for countries that don't have African swine fever or other economic diseases like foot and mouth disease or classical swine fever, that there's a lot of attention being paid in Canada now to have an avoidance of, of travel or fear that these economic diseases can come into the country because they are economic diseases. It was like mad cow disease, that there was one cow in my province of Alberta that was found, and that just totally closed the borders to the big export of cattle and beef that we had. So economic diseases are a real problem, a real issue, and need to be considered as problematic by farmers and governments and veterinary services and things like that, so that we can find these problems early on and do something about them, whether you're closing things off or whether you're trying immediately for a vaccine to reduce any risk that there might be. The consideration in India, I was here in March of 2020, and that was when the closure came for the COVID, at about the same time that the closure came for the African swine fever. So for some period of time, at any rate, the number of pigs that might have been going to Northeast would have been far reduced, but by the same token, somehow the African swine fever got out of that small neck from Assam, and I wouldn't have thought that that should be very possible, because there should have only been pigs going into Northeast rather than any coming out. And so I had suggested to the Commissioner of Livestock that if you could build a land bridge or a cross bridge for animals coming from India to cross over on the bridge and then take them into Assam with Assam vehicles, then at least you wouldn't have the Indian vehicles going in there and coming back dirty, if that's the case. So, but that was never given very much consideration.
Okay. Vishal, can you share some examples that from your best practices that you have employed to tide over these risks, and what are the biosecurity measures, etc., that you have actually implemented?
See, we in 2003, 2004, there was the first time there was an outbreak of bird flu. So what we did after that, we all our grandparent farms, we made them all-in, all-out system. So when I say all-in, all-out, I mean we bring in the flock, and when we take out the flock, we disinfect the farm, keep it empty for some time, so that the disease, we break the cycle basically of the disease from going from one flock to another. And we also implemented very strict biosecurity systems. We developed biosecurity systems where we have multiple zones in one farm, and when a person or a good move from one zone to another zone, we disinfect the vehicles. We ask the labor or the person going in the farm to take shower, to change clothes. So we created this 3-barrier system in our grandparent farms, parent stock farms, so that our flocks are disease-free. And we really saw these results, and the disease load in our farms really improved over all these years, and we, in fact, our product quality improved significantly. It was not, when we say implementing biosecurity systems, it is something that we can implement at no investment. It is just the practice or just changing the habit of the team that we can do. Apart from that, we worked a lot backward on the quality of our feed, so that the immunity of birds is better. And we invested a lot in the environmental control systems, because whatever was putting stress on the birds, we worked on that, and it really in terms of disease prevention, where we rarely see any disease outbreak in our farms.
Great. So, like Vikas, you were mentioning that you worked on immunity of birds. That is better. Mr. Alfred, I would like to ask you, like, how does genetics play a role in terms of breeding birds of a certain kind which are more immune? And do you have some experience and some examples that you would like to share with us?
Okay. I'm going to have trouble talking about birds particularly, but pigs can have the same issues. Our Canadian Centre for Swine Improvement was doing some research on whether or not there could be some immunity instilled in the pigs from the breeding that they had. So males were being tested then, and the data was looked at to see whether some sires would have more of their animals living as compared to other animals or other boar lines that would have the pigs die a lot sooner. So there is some research that's being done or is being done on breeding some immunity, if that's the case, into the animals, so that you can keep a better track of what's happening and whether or not you're having certain difficulties that would be served by the genetic change.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ganapathy, how can the research community, they collaborate with the private sector and implement these effective risk management strategies? And like when we were talking in the morning, you said like prevention is better than cure. So how do you think that they can collaborate?
Yeah, no, the innovation happens best at the interface of disciplines. And what I have been trying to advocate and work hard at is bringing best of the thinking across the board to address these issues in this sector. So in addition to ICAR, which works on this directly, there are many other technologies or bright thinkers and applications across the board, whether it is in the IITs or CSIR centers, Department of Pharmaceuticals, all of those. And how do we bring all of that to address this issue? And so that is one of the integration that is happening and needs to happen more. And the other one is bringing researchers in any of these formats and the industry together. And that needs to happen in an agile way. I saw that happen beautifully in some of my previous work in the human health side, where I used to work in, but often it doesn't work. So how do you make it work where a researcher has an idea, let's say, to create a vaccine, but that researcher doesn't know or has an access to certain either the field study sites or doesn't know how to make a vaccine. They know how to do the research on early candidate, whereas industry knows how to make vaccines, but they don't have the research investments in within the industry itself. So our office has been trying to build these science and technology clusters across different Bangalore, Hyderabad, Delhi, etc., to bring these diverse stakeholders together so that ideas just mix together, and depending on whichever issue that needs to be taken up, you can actually move them faster. And in these areas especially, we have an obligation and an opportunity to bring those two sectors together. And especially these industry groups that came today are not the ones that you run into in a health context actually. Right. And that's why they also don't show up in health track as much. If you have a supply chain, if you have market analytics, that they're very comfortable with. So somehow we need to break that barrier, and they need to be very sensitive to and understand what are the risks so they can manage it better. And also, they can serve as collaborators to these researchers, because oftentimes research happens in these laboratories outside of the divide of the field needs or understanding of the field. So breaking that, I think we can fast track development of these applications of that is coming out of the lab. And sometimes you take it to the field and you find out that what you thought of the efficacy is not 90% as the lab showed, but only 60%. Bring it back, work on that iteration. That only happens if you have close collaborations.
Right. Vishal, have you partnered with any industry research bodies and given your farm as a playground for the researcher to come in and do? Have you done that in the past sometime?
We have our own R&D department, and
okay.
we work with we work with with a genetic company to develop genetics for the Indian market, but we have no collaboration with any government institution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that were to be, like Dr. Ganapathy is saying, that's an ideal playground where the meeting of the industry with the actual practitioners happen. So if that were to come about, what do you think needs to be done at the other side, so that you are also able to participate in that?
We will be very happy and open to work with any organization who really wants to test their research, especially if it is going to help the industry. And primarily, we will be more than happy to work on the vaccine side, because in our industry, we have a lot of problems. We are dependent on imported vaccines, and we feel that the autogenous vaccines is the need of the hour. When I say autogenous vaccines, it is the vaccine is developed for a particular geography, for a particular strain, which is common in that area. The vaccines that are available right now, they are like broad spectrum vaccines. It's like buying ready-made clothes. They are not tailored solutions. And we really think that we will be more than happy to work with someone if we have opportunity to develop such kind of solutions to mitigate the risk for the farmers.
Okay, thanks. We have been talking about the risk which is associated with biosecurity, with the pandemic. But in the morning, we also heard a lot about the climate risk as well. So how do you see this risk playing out, Dr. Alfred, if you could talk about that?
There's a lot of concern about climate change, heating the planet in particular. So the mitigation for all of this is not Ms. Thunberg talking about how difficult it's going to be. It's going to be more a matter of how it is that we can do this. Some of the considerations that there are would be planting more trees, which you've done here in India, as a matter of fact. And the kind of risks that there are, we've had terrific fires in Canada because we've got a lot of trees there, and it's, I can't imagine that doesn't cause a lot of problems for the atmosphere. California has been on fire. All the western states have been on fire. So the contribution is a big problem to this pollution in the air, and and causing the ceiling to be put in so that that heat is being kept in on the world. How to mitigate this on a world scale? I mean, we've had enough of these meetings now that says that we're going to, or the governments are going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to, and so far I don't think that there's been a good opportunity to have very many changes made. People still want to drive their car. Some people still have to drive their car in order to get to where they're going. And even if it's a motorcycle, I mean, it's still a matter that there is some pollution that's produced from there. Excess heat is one of the big problems for livestock, which is what's occurring to a great extent. Animals have had to deal with that for a number of years, and of course the difficulty is that animals have died in that meantime from heat stress and from lack of water and some morbidity that goes along with having to be too hot. Violent storms that occur, whether in summer or in winter, as a matter of fact, because our power lines in eastern Canada particularly, they get ice build up on them, they break, big wind comes along, blows everything down, and so this is a problem for livestock particularly, because if there's no power, then there's no fans, there's no heating, there's no whatever it is that you need to do, no lights. So this is a kind of a problem for livestock all around the world. Whether clean water will be accessible for all animals to drink, whether we're going to have to do something about that, whether the boreholes are polluted with any kind of pollution. So overall, climate change is going to be something that we have to deal with, and maybe it is. I mean, I heard this morning and was satisfied with that science is taking care of a lot of these things, that either we're already in the forefront of these things, or that there can be some quick kinds of decisions being made on behalf of the climate, and we'll see whether or not 2030 is going to be a critical time, whether 2050 is going to be a critical time. So just to worry about things, I'm not sure. I'm hoping that Andaman and Nicobar don't go underwater.
Thank you. Vishal, I read that at Skylark you are following a carbon negative model. So if you could talk a little about that, what is it that you are doing and how is it that you are able to do that? Yeah.
So all our farms, primarily it was for the better biosecurity of the farms. We started this initiative. All the litter that comes out of the farm, we have biodigesters, and we produce biogas. And this biogas is used to run electric generators, wherein the electricity is consumed by the farms. And as a byproduct, we produce biofertilizer, which we give to the farmers. So we produce about 4 megawatt of power from these biogas generators. So in that ways we are not generating any waste, and we are carbon negative.
That's really great to know that. Yeah. So Dr. Ganapathy, if you were to one ask that you would have of the industry people, what would that be?
Depends on the industry. So if it is an industry that produces the inputs, whether it is a vaccine or other inputs into that, I would want them to be more closely connected with the innovation ecosystem, because resources, I was happy to hear that you have your own R&D group. But if you could put more money into it, you would want to, or get access to innovation coming in, you would want to. That's usually the case. And there are many institutions that are receiving grants, money from the government, etc., and supposed to provide those innovations that are not effectively being linked with the industry. So for those industries, I would like them to be more plugged into that. For the industry that is more on the supply chain, etc., I would want them to be more aware of the risks, because the best way to manage the risk is to understand the risk. It's whether it is a cooperative or the ones that are facing the consumer and also linked to the producers. The risks can come in different forms. The risk could be removed from the actual threat. During COVID, everything got disrupted. It's not because of the COVID infection to the cattle or anything. It's just a general disruption. And if I am better aware of that on how that could impact it, next time I would do a better job mitigating that. And sometimes the risk is direct, like lumpy skin disease. So today I've been receiving emails and messages that there is a strain of foot and mouth disease that is starting to spread, that around Iran, it's called SAT strain, usually found in Africa. India doesn't have it. Now, that's a concerning thing, and we need to be better prepared for that and watch that, but better prepare that better. So for these industries, I would want them to be more aware of it in terms of how to be prepared and build resiliency in your both supply chain, your management practices, and your linkages to the ecosystem. And it is an obligation we have collectively to educate the consumers also. Like the example, classic example during COVID, where you got hit with negative information which plummeted the whole industry. And then thanks to its supply of protein, it came back. Now, how could we do a better job of educating the consumers, educating the public, because that is the biggest pillar what we learned during the pandemic, going through the pandemic, whether it is human or animal pandemic. So those are some of my asks of the industry, to be more sensitive and working together, both their own benefit and also building resiliency into their systems.
It is like what you are saying is collaboration that is needed. The other is communication and coordination. That is going to form a foundation, and I think with that we will be able to develop risk mitigation strategies so that we are able to move ahead and really reap the benefits of growth from developing this particular sector. So thank you so much. So I would like to invite and hand it over to Benny.
Thank you so much. It was a very insightful session. One of my favorite words is, you see, that climate change. So we are speaking about climate change and something we discussed about livestock and how we can play around safeguard. Thank you so much for being here in spite of your busy schedule, shifting from between panels to panels. Thank you so much.